All right, so welcome to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking into the Troy LaFerrara murder case. Happened back in 2013. And on the surface,
Yeah.
we have Miranda and Elite Barber. Just, a young couple, seem like anyone else, but
Right.
their story, I'll tell you, it takes a dark turn.
It really does. And what's so striking about this case is how quickly it goes from a seemingly straightforward murder investigation
Yeah.
to something far more complex.
Right.
And a lot of that has to do with the claims made by Miranda Barber.
Yeah, so just to set the stage for everyone listening, we've got court documents, police reports, and even some interviews with Miranda herself.
Okay.
And within those sources, we find a claim that she killed at least 22 other people.
Wow.
So our mission, if you will, today is to break down the facts of this case,
Okay.
explore what motivated this couple, and try to understand, really, what happened.
I think that's a great approach.
Mhm.
And, we do have to approach Miranda's claims with some caution. It's a shocking number. And as we look at the evidence, we need to consider that she may not be a reliable narrator.
Right, absolutely. So let's start by grounding ourselves in the facts. It all begins with a Craigslist ad placed by Miranda.
Okay.
It was offering companionship. Now, Elite, that's her husband, insists that she wasn't a sex worker. He claims she was paid for delightful conversation.
Delightful conversation.
Yeah.
That's an interesting detail, isn't it?
Yeah.
It almost seems like he was trying to present a very particular image of his wife,
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
one that maybe doesn't line up with reality.
Yeah, definitely. And according to Miranda, she and Troy LaFerrara, he's the victim in this case, they agreed to meet for sex.
Mm-hmm.
They set a price of $100. They met at a mall parking lot and then drove to Sunbury, Pennsylvania.
So this is where Elite becomes a key player in the story. He was actually hiding
Oh, wow.
in the back seat of the car under a blanket,
Really?
just waiting for Miranda's signal.
That's wild. Okay, so they reach Sunbury and Miranda, gives the signal, and things escalate very quickly. Elite jumps out from the back seat, wraps a cord around LaFerrara's neck, and at the same time, Miranda starts stabbing him.
It's a very brutal attack.
Yeah.
The reports say LaFerrara was stabbed 20 times.
Oh my gosh.
And it's really jarring, this contrast between the violence and these seemingly ordinary events leading up to it.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to wrap your head around. And then, to make matters worse, after the murder, they dump LaFerrara's body in someone's backyard, and then, get this, they go out to dinner.
I mean, that reaction, that casualness after such a horrific act, investigators often see that in certain individuals with specific psychological profiles.
Yeah,
It definitely makes you question their state of mind.
for sure, for sure. And before they were caught, they even went and bought cleaning supplies to remove the blood from the car. But eventually, the police caught up with them.
Right, and initially they denied knowing anything about LaFerrara, but investigators were able to trace the last call from his phone to Miranda's phone.
So I'm guessing that was a major turning point in the investigation.
Oh, absolutely. That's when their stories started to change. They went from claiming self-defense to eventually confessing to a planned murder.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, and each layer is more disturbing than the last.
Exactly.
Which leads to the question of motive. What on earth could have driven them to do this?
Well, according to Elite, their motive was, quite simply, that they wanted to kill someone together.
together.
Yeah, and he claimed they'd even talked about it before. The timing, too, just 3 weeks after their wedding, that's disturbing.
Yeah,
It suggests that maybe it was a thrill kill.
right. Which, of course, adds another layer of complexity to this whole thing. I mean, what could lead a couple to a desire like that?
Right.
What does that say about their relationship dynamic? I mean, that they would choose to do such a violent act together.
Those are great questions. And to get a better grasp of their motivations, we need to delve into their individual backgrounds,
Okay.
particularly Miranda's.
Okay, yeah, and that's where things get even more interesting. Miranda's story is a mix of claims and confessions that are really hard to untangle. For example, she stated that she was molested as a child, and by 13 she was involved in a satanic cult.
A satanic cult.
Wow. And she doesn't stop there. She goes on to claim that this cult forced her to commit her first murder at just 13 years old.
13.
Yeah, she claims she shot a man who owed the cult money. It's a horrifying image, isn't it?
It really is.
But what makes this story even more complex is that she claimed to have killed at least 22 other people between 2008 and 2013.
Wow. I mean, that's a confession that really sent shockwaves through the media and law enforcement.
It did, and it led to investigations nationwide. The FBI and various police departments started digging into her past, trying to verify the details she provided.
Yeah, and given the seriousness of her claims, it's understandable why authorities would take them seriously.
Absolutely. But at the same time, we have to maintain some healthy skepticism, right? I mean, because if her claims are true, we're potentially looking at a serial killer who operated undetected for years.
That's a chilling thought.
It is. It really is. But we also have to consider the possibility that not everything she's saying is accurate. We need to look at the evidence and figure out what can be verified and what might be fabrication.
Right, absolutely.
It's almost like we're dealing with two parallel realities here. On one hand, we have the brutal facts of the murder, and then we have this really complex and disturbing narrative from Miranda, but it's all shrouded in uncertainty. It's just a lot to unpack.
It really is, yeah. And this is where it gets really challenging for investigators.
Yeah.
How do you separate fact from fiction when you're dealing with someone who might be a very skilled manipulator?
Right.
And what are the underlying psychological factors at play here?
Right, and if her claims are true, like you said, we're looking at a potential serial killer who operated undetected for a long time.
Exactly. And if they're false, then it raises a whole other set of questions.
So what?
Well, like, what was her motive for fabricating such a horrifying story?
Okay.
Was it a way to gain notoriety, a way to manipulate the legal system, or was it something else entirely?
Yeah, it's like we're trying to solve a puzzle, but we're missing pieces.
That's a great way to put it.
We have these bits of information, these glimpses into her mind, but we can't quite put together the full picture.
And that's often the case with these investigations, especially when they involve such complex personalities.
Right.
You know, human behavior is rarely straightforward.
No, it's not.
And trying to understand what motivates these extreme acts of violence can be incredibly challenging.
It can be, yeah. And while Miranda's claims are definitely attention-grabbing,
Yeah.
I think it's important to remember that Troy LaFerrara was a real person. His life was cut way too short.
Yes, absolutely.
And his story deserves to be heard and remembered.
I agree. It's easy to get caught up in the sensationalism of Miranda's confessions.
Right.
But we can't forget the human cost of this crime.
For sure, for sure. And, we've been focusing a lot on Miranda, but what about Elite? What do we know about his background? How did he get mixed up in all of this?
Well, unlike Miranda, Elite seems to have had a pretty ordinary life before this whole thing. He graduated high school, no signs of a troubled past, no prior run-ins with the law.
So how do you go from seemingly normal to being complicit in a brutal murder?
That's a big question, isn't it? Was he manipulated by Miranda? Did he share her desire to kill? Or was there something else driving him, something we just haven't uncovered yet?
It's hard to say for sure, but I mean, he went along with it. He actively participated in the murder, and that has to say something about his character, right?
Absolutely. It suggests a level of darkness, a willingness to commit violence that's hard to comprehend.
It is. So what was the outcome of the investigation? What happened to Miranda and Elite?
Well, despite all the unanswered questions surrounding Miranda's claims, the court found both her and Elite guilty of murdering Troy LaFerrara.
And what was their sentence?
They were both sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Life in prison without parole. Wow, that's a heavy sentence. But considering the nature of their crime, it's not surprising.
No, it's not. It reflects the severity of their actions and the impact they had on the victim and his family.
Yeah, this case really makes you think,
It does.
It highlights the dark side of human nature, the potential for violence that we all have within us.
It's a reminder that even the people who seem ordinary can be hiding some very dangerous secrets.
Yeah.
And it shows us how important it is to understand the psychology behind criminal behavior.
Absolutely. It also reminds us that we can never really know what's going on inside someone else's mind.
Right.
Even those closest to us can have hidden depths.
Yeah, and that's a truth that goes way beyond this case. It speaks to the mystery of human nature, the complexities of the human mind, which continue to fascinate us.
You're right. You're absolutely right. We've uncovered a lot of information today about this case.
Yeah.
The events, the people involved, and the motivations. But in the end, it's the unanswered questions that really stick with you.
It is. And those unanswered questions can make us want to learn more. They can push us to look at our own assumptions and question what we think we know, and to search for a deeper understanding of the world around us.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like we're dealing with these two different realities, right?
Yeah.
We have the brutal facts of the murder.
Right.
And then we have Miranda's narrative, which is complex and disturbing, but it's full of uncertainty.
Yeah, and it's really a challenge for investigators.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you separate fact from fiction when you might be dealing with someone who's really good at manipulating people,
Right.
And then what are the psychological things going on underneath it all?
Exactly. And like you said, if what she's saying is true,
Yeah.
we're talking about someone who might have been killing people for a long time without anyone knowing.
And if her claims are false,
Yeah.
then that brings up a whole other set of
Like
questions.
what kind of questions?
Well, I'm like, why would she make up such a horrible story?
Yeah.
Was she trying to get attention? Was she trying to get the legal system to do what she wanted? Or was it something else entirely?
It's almost like we're trying to put together a puzzle, but there are pieces missing.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
You have all these little bits of information, these glimpses into her mind,
Uh-huh.
but you can't really see the complete picture.
And that's really common in these kinds of investigations, especially when you're dealing with people who are complicated.
Right.
Human behavior is rarely easy to understand.
It really isn't.
And trying to figure out what drives someone to do something so violent is incredibly difficult.
Yeah. And as fascinating as Miranda's claims are,
For sure.
I think it's important to remember that Troy LaFerrara was a real person.
He was.
And his life was cut short.
Absolutely.
And his story deserves to be remembered.
It's very easy to get caught up in all the sensational stuff around Miranda's confessions.
Right.
But we can't forget that a real person died because of this.
Absolutely. We've been talking a lot about Miranda,
We have.
but what about Elite?
Yeah.
What do we know about him? How did he end up involved in this whole thing?
Well, unlike Miranda, Elite seems to have had a pretty normal life up to this point. He graduated high school. There's no indication of any trouble in his past, no trouble with the law or anything like that.
So, how does someone who seems so normal end up helping to commit a murder?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
It is.
Was he being manipulated by Miranda? Did he want to kill someone just like she did? Or was there something else going on that we haven't figured out yet?
It's really hard to know for sure, but he participated in the murder.
Yeah,
And I think that says a lot.
it does. It says that there's some darkness there
Mm,
and a willingness to be violent that is just really hard to understand.
yeah. So what happened after the investigation? What happened to Miranda and Elite?
Well, even with all those unanswered questions about Miranda's claims, the court decided that both she and Elite were guilty of murdering Troy LaFerrara.
And what was their sentence?
They were both sentenced to life in prison without any chance of parole.
Life in prison. Wow. That's a very serious sentence, but I guess it makes sense given what they did.
Yeah, it does show how serious their actions were and the effect it had on the victim and his family.
It really makes you think about a lot of things.
It does.
This case,
Right.
it shows how dark human nature can be. How we all have the potential for violence inside us.
It's definitely a reminder that even people who seem completely ordinary can have dark secrets.
Yeah,
And it's important to try to understand what causes criminal behavior.
I agree. It also makes you realize that you can never really know what's going on in someone else's mind.
Right.
Even people you're close to can have hidden parts of themselves.
And that's true about way more than just this case.
Right.
It shows how mysterious human nature can be.
It does.
It's complicated. And it continues to fascinate us.
We've learned so much about this case today, haven't we?
We have.
We've talked about what happened, the people who were involved, and their possible reasons for doing what they did.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's the questions that are left unanswered that really stick with you.
Those unanswered questions make us want to keep learning. They challenge our assumptions and make us question what we think we know. They can even push us to try to understand the world in a deeper way.
Absolutely. Okay, so as we wrap up our deep dive into the murder of Troy LaFerrara, let's try to summarize some of the key things we've learned.
Yeah, I think the most obvious one is just how brutal the murder was, the fact that they planned it, the level of violence, and then how they acted so normally afterwards. It's like they had no regard for human life.
And then, of course, we have the whole mystery of Miranda's confession, right?
Right.
Whether it's true or not, it really makes you think about what goes on in the minds of people who can be so violent.
Absolutely.
It also makes you question how you can even tell what's true and what's not in these kinds of investigations.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that the truth can be really hard to find.
Yeah.
Especially when you're dealing with people who might be trying to trick you or who see the world in a distorted way.
We've covered a lot of ground today, We talked about what happened, the people involved, and why they might have done it. But it seems like we have more questions now than when we started.
That's how it often goes with these deep dives, right? The more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And I think that's part of what makes these cases so interesting. They force us to confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world we live in.
So, to our listeners out there, we want to leave you with this thought. If Miranda's claims are true, What could have possibly led her down such a dark and destructive path? What kind of experiences, influences, and choices could make someone lose their humanity like that?
And if what she's saying isn't true, then what made her come up with such a disturbing story? What was she trying to accomplish with this elaborate lie?
This case, with all its twists and turns, really gives us a look into the complexities of human behavior. It makes us think about the potential for darkness that we all have inside us and the things that shape our decisions, our actions, and in the end, our lives.
It's definitely a case that will stick with you long after we're done talking about it.
It is.
It'll make you keep thinking about the mysteries of the human heart.
And that's it for this week's deep dive. We'll be back next week with another fascinating case. So until then, stay curious and stay safe.